Some movies can produce an echo. They elicit certain emotions when you watch them. They bring back memories. Now, if it's a first-time watch, it's slightly harder for this to happen. The circumstances have to be momentous, something that occurs at the right time in your life, with the right mindset. It's also a matter of chance. You truly luck out if you run into a film that ends up delivering an outstanding impact on you right off the bat. What generates these feelings of euphoria and awe that makes a film stay with us? It could be the imagery, the complex characters, the intricate dialogue, a perfect combination of all of those elements. What do these damp, cold, expansive landscapes produce on you? What do these piercing looks communicate? I sense a biting alienation, and yet there's a weird warmth to it. Because this film evokes the fondest of recollections in me. It makes me think of a different time. It takes me back 6 years, and even though on paper it might not look like that long ago, things were much different for me. These images belong to Nuri Bilge Ceylan's Winter Sleep, and it's my favorite film of the past decade. But in order to explain, you'll need some context. The year is 2014. I had just gotten accepted to a film school in Los Angeles, and I was getting ready to depart my home country of Peru in September to pursue my dream of becoming a true filmmaker. How did that turn out, right? However, just a month prior, the Lima International Film Festival was taking place, and 17-year-old me had to make sure I watched the best of the best. I had gotten tickets to The Dance of Reality, Camille Claudel 1915, The Reunion, a special screening for the new Peruvian comedy Viejos Amigos, and of course, I couldn't miss the big gala event of the festival, Winter Sleep. This was coming off its big win at the Cannes Film Festival a few months before.
Palme d'Or goes to Winter Sleep by Nuri, Bilge, Ceylan.
And though I wasn't familiar with the director's previous work, or Turkish cinema in general, and I didn't know anything about the film itself, I definitely was aware of its runtime. And my screening started at midnight, so I was undertaking this more as a challenge rather than a regular movie-going experience. As a matter of fact, I was worried that I wouldn't even enjoy myself, sitting at a theater in the middle of the night, getting ready to watch what seemed to be an existential oddity, only to come out at 3 in the morning, get a taxi, and think about the meaninglessness of life on the way back home. I don't want to come off like an annoying film bro, but at that age, I had done my best to do a deep dive into independent cinema and foreign language films and festival darlings. Things that would normally be on my peripheral vision as a spectator, especially considering content like this is hard to come by in a third world country. My passion for cinema had grown from a very young age, and I must have been around 14 or 15 when I started actively seeking out films with this logo, or this one, or this one. But there was always a sense of trepidation. I remember I'd watched Blue is the Warmest Color and feeling slightly underwhelmed, and I'd spend a week asking myself, why? It won the top prize at Cannes. Shouldn't it have left me mesmerized? What are these people seeing that I'm not? What am I missing? I went into Winter Sleep with those fears in mind. Would it be accessible enough for me? Would I get tired? Would I fall asleep? Apparently, I wasn't the only one with these concerns.
I was a little afraid by the film when I looked at the list and went, 3 hours 15. I was scared. I said, oh my God, I'm going to need a toilet break,
Whatever was going through my mind, I can assure you, It did not prepare me for what I was about to witness. Winter Sleep follows Aydin, an old hotel owner and landlord in a remote Turkish village where he lives comfortably with his sister Nekla and his much younger wife Nihal. It's clear from the get-go that Aydin is not a very likable character. He comes off as arrogant and he has very little care for his tenants. We also learn he used to be an actor. His hotel is properly named after Shakespeare's play, Othello, and he has inherited the landlord business from his father, a man who, according to some of the tenants, was more reasonable and fair than Aydin. But the plot of the film really kicks in when this happens. That is Ilyas, the son of Ismail, a tenant of Aydin's. It becomes clear early on that this entire family has a grudge against the old landlord. This is the reason why the young Ilyas acted with such rage, throwing a rock at Aydin's moving car, almost provoking an accident which could have had serious consequences. The dichotomy of this lower-class family is brilliant, actually. You have Ismail, the father. He's a drunk ex-convict who can't get a job because of the stigma of his troubled past. No job, no money. Every time he's on screen, we get a glimpse at an expression of sorrow on his face. This is a defeated man who has to live with the fact that he cannot support his family. That rage boiling inside him is externalized, unwillingly, through his son, Ilyas, who holds Aydin responsible for his father's misery. Perhaps too young and innocent to fully grasp the situation he's living in. Yet, his impulsiveness is not far from his father's own feeling of powerlessness. And the family member we get the most screen time from is Hamdi, Ismail's younger brother, who does his best to force a smile and tries a little bit too hard to gain sympathy from Aydin to be on his good side. It goes on to the point of humiliation.
O nedendir ki bugünle benimle beraber buraya gelip sizin bir elinizi öpmek istedi. Ben de en doğrusunu yaparsın yavrum dedim. Göreceksin dedim, bak dedim. Sen şeyini göster. Aydın Bey dedim, seni dedim affetmeyi bilecektir dedim. Doğru demiş miyim? İlyas. İlyas oğlum babandan gizli gidelim de Aydın abinin elini öpelim demedik mi yavrum? Niye mahcup ediyorsun ben insan içinde oğlum? Haydi, haydi oğlum, haydi. Haydi öpüver Aydın abinin elini, hadi koç.
Ceylan presents a story where the contrast between the social status of one family is compared to another. It's provocative, for sure, but the focus is on Aydin and the film serves more as a character exploration of the protagonist, an anti-hero of sorts. Though, unlike famous cases like Travis Bickle and Daniel Plainview, Ceylan doesn't take it to the extreme and instead stays more grounded. Aydin isn't a sociopath, he's just a bitter, self-centered old man who carries with him a harrowing shadow of alienation, as there's a disconnect from almost everyone that should be close to him. A man who, through his behavior, pushes people away. Take his sister, Nekla, for example. Whenever he has a conversation with her, it never feels as if there's truly a palpable empathy between them, as if their bond of siblings is merely held together by the fact that they're family. Otherwise, they spite one another, arguing every other night about philosophical dilemmas, of which there are aplenty throughout the film.
O kadar farklıyız, o kadar birbirine zıt ruhlar taşıyoruz ki yani. Bazen kardeş olduğumuza inanmakta güçlük çekiyorum.
Yani normal kardeşler birbirine benzemez zaten. Biri çalışkansa öteki tembel olur, biri akıllıysa öteki budalı olur, birisi sosyalse öteki içe kapanık olur falan, böyledir yani.
Yani
Yani normal yani.
İstanbul gibi bir yeri bırakıp da buraya yanınıza yerleşmeyi nasıl kabul ettim, nasıl böyle bir şey yaptım hala inanamıyorum kendime ya. Ay bu uyuşuk yerde ruhum karardı gitti ya. Ay Vallahi seni böyle gördükçe içim sıkılıyor.
Ya ne diyorsun Necla Allah aşkına ya? Ters tarafından mı kalktın, ne yaptın?
This scene, for example, clocks in at about 20 minutes. 20 minutes of two people arguing about hypocrisy, among other things. Aydin, who believes himself to be an intellectual, writing articles about themes he might not be fit to write about.
Aydın, the name of my character, also means intellectual in Turkish. So that's a little play with words, words.
And even though the film relies heavily on dialogue, Nuri Bilge Ceylan and his co-writer and wife, Ebru Ceylan, utilize a rhythm and pace that flows smoothly and never feels dull.
So when I work with other people in the script, they don't say anything against me. They accept whatever I say. But because she's my wife, she doesn't do so. So she has more rights.
It's snappy, but perhaps not in the way one has come accustomed to hear. And after shooting nearly 200 hours of footage, one of the earlier cuts of the film was actually 5 hours long. So, just in case. By trimming those 2 extra hours, they made Winter Sleep feel more compact and efficient. Sure, the runtime remains a little over 3 hours, but not a single moment feels wasted or taken for granted. I've heard some people criticize Ceylan and his work, claiming that everything he wants to express, he says. You know, a kind of reverse of show, don't tell. Ceylan chooses to tell and tell and tell. If he wants to communicate an idea, he finds no better way to do it than to have his characters debate about it for 20 minutes. But I wholeheartedly disagree with this sentiment, as Winter Sleep plays off as kind of a stage play, and given that it's an aggressive dissection of Aydin's character, its reliance on dialogue is justified. Besides, both Nuri and Ebru are phenomenal at what they do. They had worked together in some of Nuri's previous films. In Climates, for example, Ira Jaffe mentions in his book Slow Movies how the couple were sensitive to the film's divergence from what might be termed emotional minimalism. This minimalism is ever present in Winter Sleep. There aren't any big set pieces, but rather long stretches of conversations that produce a subtle, intimate impact, which in turn makes them feel gargantuan. And don't take it from me, take it from Josh Brolin.
I enjoyed that picture, Climates. You know, there's a hell of a lot of truth in it, in my opinion. Yeah, a hell of a lot of truth.
On top of that, Ceylan uses other techniques to communicate information about Aydin. This is one of those cases where space informs character. Cinematographer Gohan Tiryaki captures some breathtaking vistas that surround Aydin's cave-like hotel. Once you're removed from that area, the visuals remain just as astonishing, with snow-covered plains and dimly lit interiors. It's pleasing to the eye considering how much time you have to spend staring at the screen. And most important of all, they demonstrate just how estranged the forbidding world Aydin lives in actually is. If you compare this to the previous film I talked about on this channel, you can see a major theme going on besides the length and the setting. These are both depressing.
I'm so depressed I don't know what I'm doing. I have not got a clue.
And not for lack of trying. Ceylan is very conscious of the kind of picture he's painting with his lukewarm protagonist. For example, a customer at the hotel asks if they have any horses for riding, since he saw pictures of some of them on the hotel's website. Aydin mentions they have no horses around, and those are only pictures of the wildlife that lives around the area. However, next thing you know, he's planning to buy a horse for the hotel. Supply and demand, right? But later on, when the same customer has a candid conversation with Aydin and tells him he's a motorcycle nomad who's writing a book about his adventures on the road, Aydin brings up a book of his own he's writing, about the history of Turkish theater, referring to it as a real book, disregarding the customer's writings as something worthless. Aydin's behavior constantly belittles people. And not only strangers like this hotel customer, he even damages the relationship with his wife. When Nihal organizes a campaign to help those with less resources without the help of Aydin, he immediately jumps in and tells her everything she's doing wrong. He offers some help without intention of malice, but it reluctantly lets her know, "You are not doing this right, let me do it for you." It's as if your own personal passion project was snapped away from your hands by someone close to you, rendering your own work and effort and perspective useless. And like many of Aydin's consequential arguments, he washes his hands off, deflecting all responsibility, putting the blame for Nihal's melancholy on her and her alone.
Bütün gençliğimi seninle boğuşarak harcadım. Şimdi bu işler sayesinde kendime ve bir şeyler yapabileceğime yeniden inandım. Buradaki kuru yaşantıma anlam katacak bir amaç buldum. Hem de bana gerçekten gurur veren bir amaç. Onun için onu bari bana bırak.
Ya Nihal'cim, sen aslında yüreği iyilik dolu, kafası çalışan, mantıklı, sağduyulu bir kadınsın. Söylediğin, yaptığın her şeyde son derece akıllıca. Ya gerçekten böyle. Ama karşımızdakini olduğu gibi görmeyip onu tanrılaştırmak, sonra da sanki böyle bir tanrı olabilirmiş de olmuyormuş diye ona kızmak. Bana biraz haksızlık etmiyor musun?
It's scenes like this, exquisitely written, that make me feel so drawn towards this film. But is that really why Winter Sleep has stuck with me for the past 6 years and has had an emotional resonance? This is probably where I have to confess. I think I owe you an explanation. You've probably noticed already, but I'm not very smart. I've been meaning to do video essays or a podcast or written essays or getting into film criticism for the longest time. And the reason why I have somewhat avoided it is because I am terrible at articulating my opinions in regards to film. I feared that nothing will come out of me talking about a film because it's got great dialogue, it's got great cinematography, it's got great directing, it's got great acting. Putting into words a more analytical approach to filmmaking results in me sounding repetitive and obnoxious. But then I remembered something. I love movies. Like I'd mentioned at the beginning of the video, some films can produce an echo within you. I remember sobbing with the final minutes of Arrival sitting next to my friend at a screening, and the opening sequences of Phantom Thread almost brought tears to my eyes because I knew I was witnessing powerful craft like no other. Those were first-time watches that creeped their way into my heart and carved a mark on it. Similarly to some of the films from my childhood, like Pinocchio, I remember I must have run that VHS tape over and over and over again until I probably wasted it. They bring back memories of a different time. The Recollection serves as my own way to express why these films are meaningful to me. I find it much easier and, quite honestly, more gratifying to talk about my emotions rather than dissecting a film and talking about its craft. If you feel like watching more thorough dissections of movies, TV shows, and the likes, I can safely recommend all of these channels. Their content is far superior than the one I'm creating. And now I feel kind of guilty, as if I was tricking you into watching my personal diary rather than give you a proper video essay of Winter Sleep. But to answer why I hold it as the shining cinematic achievement of the decade on a personal level, I have to get, well, personal. So as uncomfortable as the next segment is going to be, I am sorry, here we go. Early on in the film, Nekla brings up this idea.
Ya sana bir şey soracağım. Kötülüğe karşı koymamak. Ne demek sence?
Nasıl?
Much like the other broad subjects brought up in the film, this is discussed and argued about among the characters. But beyond that, I think there's a brilliant correlation between the concept of not rejecting evil and what the movie leaves you with at the very end. After having a somewhat cathartic experience, Aydin returns home to his wife. They have drifted further and further apart, and their relationship has deteriorated to the point where he can't even talk to her face to face, and instead, he has to write her a letter. In this letter, he basically says, "I understand the kind of person I am, but I can't change." As they share one last look, Aydin, who refuses to become a better man, goes back to his office and starts typing his self-indulgent real book, and the film ends. After having sat for 3 hours and 15 minutes watching this despicable character have his ups and downs, one might want to see a different kind of closing. One might want to see him get his comeuppance, or having his arc conclude with him realizing a major change needs to happen. But what Ceylan does is rather dreary and beautiful. He lets his main character not reject the evil within him, and instead of choosing to change, he accepts himself for who he is. Arrogant, selfish, self-absorbed. 17-year-old me watched this movie and got a certain message out of it. Accept your own toxicity. I was a very different person in 2014. I had a lot of self-loathing issues. I would look at myself and not like what I was seeing. I was antisocial. I had an unpleasant personality, and perhaps, like Aydin himself, I was arrogant. Winter Sleep was a pathway to me accepting these negative aspects about myself and deciding not to change. Why should I? All this gloom and cynicism, they're part of me after all, right? 23-year-old me looks at Aydin's journey and recontextualizes the message. A lot has changed. Part of me has changed for the better, and some still remains the same. When I watch Winter Sleep today, I feel relieved that at least my mindset is that I choose to reject evil, to reject my own toxicity, to change for the better, and not isolate myself from the people that are important to me. By choosing, I take action, unlike the tragic ending of Aydin's character. Inaction is, in fact, one of the major themes in the movie. In Poetics of Slow Cinema, Emre Kahlayan points out such an austere representation of action tests narrative intelligibility, and, in Ceylan's case, the inactivity of the characters become revelatory. Our protagonist chooses not to change. He chooses not to take a stronger stance to prevent Hamdi and Ilyas to shame themselves while asking for forgiveness. He chooses not to step in and stop the eventual eviction of the impoverished family, who has already been victim to debt collectors. When the horse wrangler violently captures the horse for his hotel, his inaction of stepping in to stop the aggression towards the animal reveals character. It's only after the fact, some days later, that he lets the animal go. He's paid good money for it, but he chooses to let it run free, in an act of what seems to be compassion. Maybe he couldn't bear the thought that a creature that had been submitted to such pain was under his command. It's the only scene that shows us Aydin repenting. The only scene where he chooses to take action, seeking some form of redemption. And it's very telling that he can only seek something like this when it comes to the perish of an animal. Yet he cannot seem to find empathy within the bounds of his human relationships. Maybe he's a lost cause. Maybe there's no redemption for him. But then again, back in 2014, I thought I was a lost cause. And look at us now.